My name is Chuma Chinye, and I am your family lawyer. I was called to the Nigerian bar in 1988, and I have over 35 years' experience in family law practice. I've helped countless families navigate Nigeria's complex legal terrain, and I am desirous of bringing this knowledge and expertise to you free of any charges. My name is Chuma Chinye, and I am your family lawyer. It gives me great pleasure to bring this episode of Your Family Lawyer to you today. Today, we'll be taking a trip into uncharted territory. We're talking about paternity fraud and DNA testing. As you know, this has captured social media in recent times with stories and knocks on those who are involved. Victims and perpetrators alike have been dragged. But today, we'll look at what the law says about it. We'll leave you with heart-wrenching stories, and we'll provide you with guides as to whether or not it is desirable to get involved with DNA testing. Paternity fraud is also known as paternity misattribution. In plain language, this occurs when a man is incorrectly identified as the biological father of a child. Paternity fraud is a serious issue with significant legal and sociocultural and even emotional implications for families. Paternity fraud is a social media pastime in Nigeria. People are dragged and sometimes denigrated when news of the outcome of DNA testing filters out. Inevitably, there is so much misinformation based on half-truths and outright ignorance. Before we proceed, we'll provide you with some facts and myths surrounding paternity fraud in Nigeria. The first and perhaps the most commonly held myth is that a man can only be the father of a child if he is married to the mother of that child. But the truth is that a man can be a father regardless of his marital status. In other words, you do not need to be married to a woman to be the known father of that child. Secondly, it is often perceived that and believed that a child born during marriage is always the child of the husband. This is correct in law. But whilst there is a presumption of paternity, this presumption can be rebutted with evidence such as DNA testing. It's always held and believed too, particularly now that it's getting a little common, that DNA testing is 100% accurate. Whilst DNA testing, in fact, is highly accurate, it is not 100% foolproof. There is yet another myth which says that paternity fraud is only committed by a woman, when in truth, paternity fraud can also be committed by men. For instance, a man can falsely claim to be the father of a child because he had an affair with a married woman, but the DNA testing can disprove his claim. But you can imagine what he would have left that family with. Leave them in wreck, destroyed emotionally, destroyed physically. Now, the presumption of paternity is contained in Section 167 of the Evidence Act, and it provides that a child born during the course and continuance of a valid marriage between the child's mother and any man, or within 280 days after the dissolution of that marriage, provided that the mother remains unmarried, a child born during that 280 days shall be presumed to be the child of the former husband or late husband if the man is deceased. The Act also presumes that a child born during a marriage is a child of the husband unless the contrary is proved. And the Act provides for the rights of children, including the rights to know their parents. This right is fully enshrined in the Child Rights Act of 2003 as well. But the presumption that the husband is the father of a child born by his wife in the course of their marriage can be rebutted. In other words, whilst the law assumes that once that child is born in that marriage, that child is the child of the husband. But if katakata bursts and there is a need to establish the paternity of that child, the person claiming that the child is not that of the man has a huge burden of proving that that is so. And the law prescribes quite a number of very difficult ways to prove this. First, or for instance, you need to prove that the man is impotent, is not functional, or that he is sterile. In other words, even if he can have sex, his spermatozoa is dead and cannot fertilize an egg. If the husband is proven to be impotent or sterile at the time of conception, the presumption of paternity can be rebutted. But you can imagine how difficult this would be to prove. Now, you may also need to prove separation or non-access if the spouses are separated or did not have access to each other at the time of conception. Now, what this means is that you need to prove that the man and the husband, there is no chance that they sneaked behind somewhere in the night or at any time and copulated. For instance, if the man at Japan and is out of the country and you can show he didn't have a ticket to come to Nigeria, or that the wife didn't have a visa to travel, but they can't carry Bele, then there's problem. DNA testing and other scientific evidence excludes the husband as the biological father, then that presumption can also be rebutted. Let me put it differently. If you do a DNA test and you can prove, it shows 99% thereabout that the man can be the father of the child, then that presumption of paternity is rebutted. Now, the consequences of this includes that the child could be looked at as illegitimate. Now, we need to look at what the consequences of presumption of paternity are. In other words, when you assume or presume that a child belongs to a father, what happens to that child? Is the child considered legitimate? The answer is yes. Any child that is born during the pendency or subsistence of a marriage is considered legitimate and has the same right as other children whose paternity perhaps was never in dispute. Irrespective of the possibility that the mother's husband was not responsible for the pregnancy in the first place, that child is considered legitimate. And that child is entitled to inherit from the woman's husband's estate unless he left a will that provides otherwise. Usually, the husband, the man, is also responsible for providing support and maintenance of that child. That child will not be him born. He will be bound to provide for the child insofar as he remains in his custody and perhaps remains married to the wife. Let's take a little breather here and consider how customary law and Islamic law view presumption of paternity. In our time here, the presumption of paternity under customary law and Islamic law differ minimally, very minimally, from that of the English law under the Evidence Act. In some Nigerian customary laws, paternity is presumed if the child is born during a valid marriage or within a reasonable time after the marriage has ended. In fact, in certain parts of Igbo land, and specifically on the Chaubo where I come from, children born by a wife of a deceased husband who chooses to remain in the husband's family were accepted as children of the man, and they were entitled to the full benefits of the man's actual children before he passed. Customary law emphasizes the importance of legitimacy, and children born outside marriage may face social stigma. This is significant where the husband denies paternity of children. Where disputes arise over paternity, they are usually resolved through traditional mechanisms, such as family meetings or community elders gathering, or even sometimes oaths are administered to prove paternity. Of course, we know that this is against natural justice, equity, and good conscience. Under Islamic law, paternity is presumed if the child is born during a valid marriage as well, or within a reasonable time after the marriage has ended. Islamic law recognizes two concepts. One, I hope I pronounce it well, ilah, which is a husband's denial of paternity, and lian, which is a wife's admission of adultery. Pardon me if I didn't get the pronunciations well, but these concepts can affect the presumption of paternity. Islamic law permits DNA testing to establish paternity, but it's not always accepted as conclusive evidence. Because it's often hard to ultimately what the Quran has to say about such situations. And please note that the Nigerian legal system itself is complex, and the specific circumstances of each case can affect the outcome. For example, children born in an Islamic marriage or a customary marriage will present a totally different legal problem from that that is involved under the Evidence Act. If you are dealing with a situation involving paternity, it's essential to consult with a qualified Nigerian lawyer for personalized guidance that may suit your custom, your religion, or generally the circumstances as the need may arise. We're going to look at two heart-wrenching but insightful stories of paternity fraud and its consequences on family life. This story will blow your mind, like it did mine. In February of 2021, social media was agog when a judge of the Delta State High Court revealed that he was not the biological father of 3 children from his marriage with his former wife. The story was published by the Punch newspaper, and the story we're about to tell you was reported to be part of a statement that he just signed and dated on the 28th of January in 2021. My lord alleged that his wife, Celia, his former wife, Celia, walked away from the marriage when their youngest child, now 17 years old, was just 6 years old. He described the development as traumatic and said he and his current wife have been wholly responsible for the well-being and education of the 3 children from the previous marriage, whom he thought were the fruits of that marriage. This woman walked away from her husband 11 years earlier, and in the intervening period, 2 of the children were already university undergraduates at the time of this unwholesome development. This learned judge first got the information from an anonymous source, indicating to him that the last child of his earlier marriage was not his biological child. The information came to him during the lockdown precipitated by COVID-19 in 2020. He said he was only able to confirm the claim to be true through a DNA testing in August of 2022. Shocker. The DNA test result, which came out in September of 2020, confirmed that he was not the biological father of that last child. The information he received proved to be correct. Following the result of the first result, he convened a joint meeting of his extended family on the one side and of Celia's paternal and maternal families on the other side, where he confronted her with the paternity fraud allegation. Although initially she strongly denied, insisting that the judge was the biological father. When the cocoa came to cocoa, she has since confessed to having the child with another man during the course of his marriage to the Lord. Of course, this outcome now prompted the learned judge to doubt the paternity of the first 2 of 3 children that he had with her. Painful, you can imagine, painful as it would have been. The DNA testing also confirmed his worst fears. He had been raising other men's children all his life. The first 2 children were also not his children. Following this development, the traumatized judge had to compel his second wife to agree to have DNA testing on the 4 children of the subsequent marriage. But God is merciful. Fortunately, the results showed that he was the biological father of those 4 children. Imagine if it was otherwise, and you can imagine what his relief was at this result. Good guy. He insisted that he would take care of the children nevertheless, in spite of the revelation. And he said that for Celia, the philandering Celia, and her boyfriend or boyfriends, as the case may be, he left them to their consciences and to God Almighty. You may have noticed that I was smiling at the end of the first story I just told you. The next story is impossible to smile. I actually had tears in my eyes when I read this story. So please fetch your handkerchiefs too, because you too may drop a tear or two for the victim of this fraud. This is a tragic story of how a man, after being led to undergo vasectomy by his wife, found out that the 3 children they had together, whom he called his own, were not his biological children. Let me explain what a vasectomy means. A vasectomy is a surgical procedure of cutting or sealing the tubes that carry a man's spermatozoa to permanently prevent him from fertilizing a woman's eggs. After welcoming 3 kids, a boy and 2 girls, the couple decided that they were done with having kids. They, the husband, led by the wife, agreed to foreclose possibility of having more children. They agreed that the man should be castrated. The trusting man went through the process. After this has been done, for some reasons that we are not aware of, the man conducted DNA testing on his 3 children. This was done after he had done the vasectomy. The result broke his heart, broke his marriage, and frustrated his life. The result showed that the man was not the father of the 3 children, and that the possibility of his being their father was 0. It is difficult to imagine his life after that day. His deceitful wife acquiesced with the decision to have a vasectomy as a birth control measure, knowing fully well that the children she mischievously attributed to the man were not his, and that after the procedure, the man may never have children of his own. Cruel, if you ask me. Wicked. This is not less than what is called witchcraft. Away from that heart-wrenching story, let's give you some notable facts that you should know about paternity fraud. What you need to know is not far from you as you would think. Don't imagine that, as I say, another man had Nagalawa. It is closer to you than you imagine, because studies suggest that paternity fraud occurs in approximately 30%. You heard me, 30% of cases in Nigeria. So there are 3 of you gathered there now. One of you may not be the child of your father. Please note too that paternity fraud can occur due to various reasons. Infidelity is one of them. Of course, polygamy is another. Rape or deliberate wicked misattribution, like the one we just witnessed. You can already tell from the stories you just heard that paternity fraud can lead to emotional distress, financial burdens, and social stigma for the incorrectly identified father and for the children involved. Therefore, you need to be careful. Let me say that DNA testing is becoming increasingly popular in Nigeria as a means of establishing paternity. There have been many distressing cases and many stories. But let's look at how the court look at this situation. In a case decided by the Abuja High Court in Gwagwalada, a certain Mr. Oduche was involved. His wife left him after they had been married for well over 12 years and had 3 children. 3. Thereafter, she proceeded to change the surname of these children from Oduche. Then Mr. Oduche filed for divorce on the grounds of divorce and adultery. Adultery on the part of the woman, whom she said had been moving from one bed to the other with other men. The wife came to court and shamelessly claimed that her husband was not the father of the children who were born by her whilst they were married. She asked the court to compel this man to undergo DNA testing to prove that he was the father of the children. You know, different strokes, they say, different strokes, they say for different folks. This man, I don't know why, but he said he will not do DNA testing and that the children were his own. The court agreed with him and held that you cannot compel a spouse to bring evidence to show that a child that was born in the course of his marriage did not belong to him. Heart-wrenching. But great guy. Maybe he knew that maybe he wasn't the father of the children, or maybe he's like me. And he says, look, what's the point? Families in Nigeria are increasingly catching the bug of DNA testing, particularly in cases of paternity disputes. And with the advancement of DNA technology, it's becoming quite easy for individuals to determine biological relationships, the outcomes of which are sometimes disheartening. You need to ask yourself whether it is worth it before you go into it. But let me tell you some of the reasons why people do DNA testing, apart from infidelity. You may ask yourself, why would I go through that? There are a number of reasons why people undergo DNA testing. They include what we have seen so far, paternity disputes. DNA testing helps to resolve paternity dispute. If you look at your child money, and it's looking like that of the landlord, you may want to find out what's going on behind you. But you also have to be aware that this could have significant emotional and financial implications for you and for your family. Then there is inheritance and property rights. DNA testing can help to determine inheritance and property rights, particularly in cases where there are multiple wives and as a result, multiple claimants. You know those painful scenarios. When Oga don't work, and some strange women show up, sometimes by the graveyard, sometimes in church, sometimes at the morning home, with 2 or 3 children, or one, looking exactly like the picture of the dead man hanging on the wall, the flat nose, and thick lips, just like the father. Those old enough might that our president, who never was, Abiola, married dozens and dozens of wives. And upon his contrived death, his will reveals that he indicated that all of his children, except those from his first wife, should undergo DNA testing before they could claim their inheritance. I think that's the ripples are still roaming around Lagos and probably the whole of Nigeria. Okay. DNA testing could also be used for immigration purposes, for family reunification across borders. It could be used to establish biological relationships to enable immigration determine whether the family you're asking to join you are actually yours by blood. There have been reported cases of persons unable to join their families or people they thought were their family members because the outcome of the DNA testing established that paternity was fraudulently or wrongly attributed. And don't scoff, please do not, because it could be you. Yes, it could be you. It's all the statistics we just give to you. The process of DNA testing in Nigeria can be done with reputable government or private hospitals because actually these are very contentious issues and sometimes people can manipulate them. Be sure that you're not led to the wrong place or that you're not given a wrong DNA testing. And after your life is wrecked, you find out that it is not correct. DNA samples are collected from the individuals involved, usually through cheek swabs or blood samples. The DNA samples are analyzed in a laboratory to determine the biological relationship. The results are then provided to the individuals who asked for it in the first place. Usually within a few days, the result is out. But those few days, that waiting interval often seems like eternity. And the stress can only be imagined and experienced. Sometimes when the results come, alarm will blow, kata will burst. You know what I mean? When the result comes out and you are looking at your wife in the face and asking, who is responsible for this child? The legal implications of DNA testing are enormous, particularly when paternity disputes are involved, because DNA testing can be used as evidence in court to establish whether a man is the father of a child. It can be used to determine inheritance rights. It can be used to determine property and proprietary rights when family issues arise. Unfortunately, it has also ruined homes. It has caused deaths, and it has derailed destinies and aborted lifelong dreams. On the flip side, it has also exposed mindless deceits and provided closure where there have been lingering doubts as to the paternity of a particular child or children. What then are the remedies if you're thinking or wondering whether a child is yours or not? If you suspect that a child is not your biological child, as a father, you may request DNA testing to establish paternity. A man who has been correctly identified as the father of a child can also initiate a suit in court to dispute that paternity. But in all of this, what we recommend is counseling. Counseling can be very beneficial for individuals affected by paternity fraud to determine whether you should go ahead with DNA testing or to cope with the emotional consequences of a not too desirable result. It is essential for family to understand the implications of DNA testing and to seek legal advice before jumping in, because it could sometimes be an endless pit that you are jumping into. It is sometimes a one-way ticket to misery and never-ending heartache. You don't want to be in that place. This is imperative when one party, a husband or wife, knows or has reasons to believe that there is a live skeleton in his or her cabinet. If you have that skeleton, mind yourself. DNA testing and its outcomes are not for the faint-hearted. If you cannot handle the unexpected outcomes, or if you think it will harm you or your family members, it may well be better to let its little dog lie. Nevertheless, not a one-size-fits-all. The advice, look before you leave. Look before you leave. And please, talk to a lawyer. Talk to a lawyer now if you're in that situation. Talk to a lawyer this minute. Until next Saturday, stay informed and be empowered. And please be good to your family. My name is True Machine, and I am your family lawyer.